Hello there, you're welcome to my channel. In today's video, I would like us to take a look at the political developments in the Gold Coast, and specifically, we are going to take a look at the period between 1500 to 1900, which began the colonial period, or the period in which the Europeans were along the coast. So we shall take a look at the political impact of the European presence in the Gold Coast. And that is the first subtopic that we shall look at, the political impact. So, which means that we may have the social impact, we may have the economic impact. And so today we are looking at the political impact of the European presence along the coast or in the Gold Coast. Now have in mind that at this period, when we make mention of the Gold Coast, Asante is not part of the Gold Coast. Have that in mind, so that in our further discourse, you don't assume that when you hear the name Gold Coast, you assume that Asante is part. Asante, as we are saying, was not part of the Gold Coast. Anytime you hear Gold Coast, Asante is not part until 1947, and we are not there yet. So before we begin with our lesson objectives, I would like to remind you to subscribe to our channel if you have not done so, and if you have done so too, we thank you very much for your support. So let's go into our lesson objectives for today. So our lesson objectives for today is quite simple. By the end of our discussion or this lesson, you should be able to discuss the political impact of the European presence in the Gold Coast. The political impact of the European presence in the Gold Coast. A lot of students find it very difficult in distinguishing between political effect, social effect, as well as economic effect. Most of them tends to, write political effect as economic effect, or for, like social effect. Most of them don't know how to distinguish between them. So you have to be very mindful of these things. Now, before we begin with the political effect, we are aware, informed too, that some around the 13th century, 14th century thereabout, some Europeans came or visited the coast of modern Ghana today, and they named the stretch along the coast as the Gold Coast. And so today we are looking at the political impact of these Europeans who came to settle on the coast of Ghana. So let's go into the first of the political impact. Now, the first political impact of the European presence along the coast or along the Gold Coast was that the European presence led to interethnic wars in the Gold Coast. Interethnic wars, because the Europeans came to settle along the coast or in the Gold Coast, it brought about interethnic wars among the various ethnic groups in the Gold Coast. Now, interethnic wars means wars between two ethnic groups, and I know by now you know some of the ethnic groups we are talking about. Now, why would the presence of the Europeans along the coast lead to interethnic wars? The reason mainly was because of trade. Okay, now trade was the main cause of the ethnic wars. Now, why would trade become a problem? Bear in mind that the reasons, or the major reasons for the coming of the Europeans to the Gold Coast was to trade. Okay, now the inland states such as Asante, Asante was in the inland or in the forest region. They wanted a direct access to the coast so as they could directly trade, directly with the Europeans. Asante being in the inland or in the forest regions of Ghana today, were trading with the Europeans who had settled along the coast. All right. However, the coastal states, such as the Fanti people, were the middlemen in that trade between the Asantes and the Europeans. Okay, so many a times, Asante may have to trade through these middlemen or Fantis. So, for instance, if an Asante wants to sell a gold to the for British or the Europeans along the coast, they may have to give the gold to the Fantis. The Fantis will purchase the gold, and then they will in turn go and sell it to the Europeans. So the Fantis acted as what middlemen in the trade between the Asante and then the British. Now, the middlemen, the Fantis especially, some of them engaged in trade malpractices. They were actually cheating the Asante traders. So what happened was that Asante saw this, and then they decided that they didn't want to trade with the Europeans through the Fanti states. However, they wanted to trade directly with the Europeans who were along the coast. But the Fantis would also not agree, because their livelihood was also based on the middleman role that they were playing, because that is what they were also getting money from. So if they are to allow Asante to trade directly with the Europeans, which means that they themselves, the Fantis, are going to be displaced in the whole trade process. And so they would not allow that. And Asante to insist on trading directly with the Europeans would eventually lead into many wars, whereby Asante would invade the Fanti states in order to open the trade route so that they could trade, because most at times these these Fanti traders, they block the trade routes, preventing Asante from trading directly with the Europeans. And so Asante will fight on several wars with these Fanti states, in order to open the trade route so that they could go in there along the coast and trade directly with the Europeans. And this, we are saying, was a political impact of the European presence, because they were along the coast. This whole interethnic wars, started, and it started because of trade. Good. I know you are okay with that point. Let's take a look at the next of the points. Now, the next one had to do with the European presence led to a political rivalry among states. At this point, when we are talking about states, we are talking about the Achim, the Asante, Adanse, Akwemu. These are states. Now, we are saying that the European presence led or brought about a political rivalry. A political rivalry in the sense that each of these states aimed at becoming the most powerful among all of them. And so some of them may intend to attack each other, for political supremacy, right? Now, the inland states, those who were in the forest, example, Adanse, Denchira, Achim, Asante, and etc., they competed with one another for the control of sources of goods sold to the Europeans. Example of these goods were slaves, ivory, and then gold. Now, you see, what you should have in mind is that most of the items of trade needed by the Europeans were found in the interior. Most of the items of trade were found in the interior, and they were controlled by these forest states. So then, all these forest states, as we have already talked about, Adanse, Denchira, were all fighting for the source of that particular item of trade needed by the Europeans. And that obviously will lead to war, because maybe, for instance, Asante in Kumasi may not be rich in gold. All right. Now, however, if Asantes are to attack Adanse, which was rich in gold, they would get access to the gold and sell to the Europeans. And so that, we are saying, brought about a lot of, political, of course, rivalry. Every state wanted access to the source of the goods sold to the Europeans. Now, example of this conflict was between the Achim, Achim and Akwemu in 1659 to 1630 for the control of the rich gold resources in the Brim Valley. So Achim and Akwemu went to war so that they could get access to the gold at the Brim area. Now, the war ended with the defeat of Akwemu. Also, Asante also defeated Denchira in 1701 and fought the Achim and other states in the south in order to keep the trade route also open, as we have already indicated. So fighting for the source of the goods that were sold to the Europeans also brought about this political rivalry. All the states wanted to be powerful in the forest region. All right, good. Now let's take a look at the third point. The third point also has to do with the European spheres of influence. Okay, the European spheres of influence. Now, the Europeans made areas where they had their settlement as sphere of what? Influence. So the Dutch, for instance, considered the stretch of the coast from their Christianborg castle, which is at Osu, to Keta as their territory. So from Christianborg castle at Osu to the Volta region, Keta, all those stretch or that part were for the Dutch. And so the Dutch came to consider all the people who live along that stretch, Osu to Keta in the Volta region, as their people. And indeed, the people themselves, the local people themselves, came to see themselves as being a Dutch, because they were learning their language, they were doing everything like Dutch. Now, to the west of Osu, where Dutch and British, that area were demarcated between the Dutch and the British Accra. So where the British also stayed, that area was also considered as a British Accra. Now let's take a look at more of them. When you look at Elmina, for instance, Elmina was a Dutch town. Now, whilst Cape Coast was a British town. Why were they Dutch and British town? Simply because the Dutch were occupying the Elmina castle, and so the people of Elmina came to see themselves as Dutch. Now, whereas in Cape Coast, the British were occupying Cape Coast, and so the people who lived in Cape Coast came to consider themselves as what? As British. Now, Sekondi was also divided into Dutch and British Sekondi. Part of Sekondi belonged to the Dutch, part also belonged to the British. So they called themselves Dutch Sekondi and Dutch Sekondi, and then British Sekondi. Now, these designated European spheres of influence indeed divided the people and created enmity and great tension. The people of Elmina, who were the friends of the Dutch, for example, regarded the people of Cape Coast, who were the friends of the British, as enemies, and vice versa. Thus, neither the people of Elmina nor the people of Cape Coast regarded one another as fellow Fante. Is that not interesting? So you see, the people now, even though they are all Fantes, they are all Fantes, but because of the European presence along the coast and their sphere of influence on these local people, these local people forgot that they were actually all one people, or Fante. But they came to associate themselves with these Europeans, and that brought somehow mistrust, among the people, enmity, among the people, and all of that. Okay, enmity among the people, and then all of that, and this has gone on quite far. Today, some, people see themselves as NPP, NDC, and it is interesting to to note that some people see themselves as NPP, and therefore they are not supposed to be friends with an NDC person. Some people see themselves as NDC, NPP. We are not the same. We are different people, and so they clash and fight, forgetting that they are all Ghanaians. Even some political parties even go further, to compound this by doing tribal politics, forgetting that we are all Ghanaians on a larger scale, Africa. And these things were the deliberate activities of the Europeans in trying to divide and rule Africans so that we don't see ourselves as one. That is the only way they could be able to rule us, and they succeeded in doing so. And even after colonialism, we've not totally been liberated from some of these ideas, kind of. And so we should see ourselves as one people, whether you are from Togo or you are from the Volta region or whatever. We are Ghanaians, we are Africans. Good. Let's take a look at the last of the impact of the European presence in the Gold Coast. The last one had to do with the Europeans' impact led to the introduction and sale of firearms. The availability of these weapons was an incentive for frequent and bloody wars. Europe came to Africa, to the Gold Coast. One of the items of trade that the Europeans were trading with the African was in gun and gunpowder. They were selling guns to the Africans, and so most Africans were exchanging gold, ivory, and other commodities. Slaves for gun and gunpowders. That's quite weird, right? Yeah. And this would explain why Africans, or West Africans, we have lacked development for a very long time. Because how can you be exchanging, giving gold to somebody, and the person is giving you a gun? And today we have nothing to show for as West Africans, and we've given all the money, all the gold, all the precious minerals, whatever, to them. And today we go and beg for loan. But hey, the introduction of these guns introduction of these guns by the Europeans also led to frequent wars. So these guns led or brought about the emergence of very, very large states, new states such as Dentra, Akwemu, Achim, and Asante. All these states had access to slaves and gold, and so they were able to exchange them for gun. Now, what would they use the gun for? The gun was used for attacking lesser states and making them vassals to them, and therefore they used these guns to embark on several wars of conquest. All right, making sure that they gain more lands. In Africa, our land is everything. So these states resorted to military campaigns that's incorporating small states such as Awin, Danse, Trifo, Kowasa, and Sefi, all into their kingdom. And as I said, in Ghana, land is everything. When you have land, it seems that you have everything. So that is what these states actually did. And so I think with this fourth point, we will end our lesson here. I know you have learned something, you have been educated. There was a question that came on this last let me see, I think it's 2019. 2019. It says, highlight any 4 ways in which European presence affected the political developments in the south, in southern Ghana up to 1900. And that's what we have just done. I know when you see such a question, you will be able to answer it. Thank you very much for watching. Do not forget to subscribe and share. Have a nice day. Bye.